Alright folks, how you doing? So quite soon I'm going to be making a video, possibly a series of videos, about whether or not William Wallace deserves to be elevated to the rank of saint, especially in the Catholic Church. Now I myself am not Catholic, I'm Presbyterian, I was brought up in the Church of Scotland, but William Wallace was. He was a practicing Catholic, he was a devout Catholic all of his life, and he prayed to the Virgin Mary, and he had his own prayer book ever since he was a boy. He was brought up in the church. He had family members, uncles who were priests, for example, who helped him and his family at various stages of Wallace's early career, particularly, the early stages of his rebellion, even before his rebellion, you know, and his opposition to the English. But there's certainly a few, I've bookmarked quite a few kind of places in this book here, William Wallace, Robin Hood Revealed, where Wallace goes through kind of religious, spiritual experiences like receiving visions, and there's one instance where he slips into a coma, possibly dies. It depends on whether or not you believe in resurrection and is brought back to life. Certainly on more than one occasion he should have died, could have died, but didn't. And I think there's a strong case to be made that Wallace fits the criteria of a Roman Catholic saint. Because for one thing, probably not coincidentally, if you go to St. Margaret's Chapel at Edinburgh Castle, you have St. Margaret, you have St. Columba, St. Ninian, and William Wallace, all on the stained glass windows. Maybe a bit of a nudge there, a bit of a hint. I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, of course, but not really, because, Wallace, the way that he met his death was as a Christian martyr. I won't spoil it here, I'll get into that when I go into the book. But, I believe that Wallace, because of his piety and his righteousness and his complete faith, and he was very much a man of faith, I believe that he did receive divine inspiration. And this was largely what led him to the magnificent victories that he achieved against the English, in 1296, 1297, 1298, right about then. And the way that Wallace, fought with complete, assurance, because he knew that his life on this earth, was going to be a very short one, but, his example would inspire people. Like the way he never gave up on Robert the Bruce, for example. He always thought that the Earl of Carrick, who was his cousin and who was the man who knighted William Wallace, he always thought that Robert the Bruce was destined to become the king, and he steadfastly held behind that belief. Well, if you're going by what the minstrel says anyway, and remember that the minstrel's account is based on contemporary sources. It's based on the testimony and the account of two individuals primarily, and that was Thomas Gray and John Blair, who was the personal chaplain of William Wallace. And the minstrel's account was based on a translation from a Latin account. So it's not a primary source, but it's pretty close. It's basically the Latin account written by John Blair was translated by the minstrel, and that's where we get the story from. And of course, there's different variations and versions and all this sort of thing, but it is pretty close to being contemporary. It's not strictly speaking a primary source, but it's pretty damn close, that's for sure. I mean, it was written in 1361, so that's not very long after Wallace died. He was martyred in 1305. So it's only a few decades. It's not like it was written over 100 years later. I mean, that whole thing about Henry the Minstrel and Blind Harry, they were actually two separate individuals. Blind Harry was later on. He was alive in the 15th century, but people mix those two up as being the same, but they're not actually the same person. They're different sources. So you kind of have to get over that stumbling block. So no, this wasn't stuff that was written over 100 years later. This was only a few short decades later. So you do have to separate those two things. Like I said, Henry the Minstrel was a different figure from Blind Harry. They're not the same. And that's where a lot of people kind of get mixed up and confused. But the way that Wallace met his end was very much as a Christian martyr. There were parallels to the way that the Lord died and the way that the Lord Jesus Christ, the way that he was executed, and the way that William Wallace met his end. I wouldn't compare the two because that would be extremely sacrilegious. And cause great offence. And I'm not comparing William Wallace to Jesus Christ. I mean, absolutely not. That's two totally different levels. Two very different people. Jesus Christ was divine. William Wallace was not divine. But you know, there were sort of parallels in the way that they met their end, you know, which is quite interesting, you know. And again, people would say, well, you know, the minstrel just made that up to make him look like a saintly figure. But the thing is, like, the minstrel does nothing to disguise any of Wallace's flaws. That's the thing. I mean, if it was just pure propaganda to make Wallace look saintly and like this divine figure, then how come he leaves in all his mistakes and his errors? And Wallace makes a lot of mistakes and errors in his life, particularly in the early phases. You know, let there be no mistake about that. You know, Wallace makes some truly horrendous mistakes, but you know he does atone for them. There are times when he puts his family in danger, when he puts his men in danger, puts his friends in danger through his own deeds and recklessness and aggression and all this sort of thing. But he makes up for it. He redeems himself. You know, it's not about being perfect. It's realizing your imperfections and working on them. You know, that's what makes you a good person. It's not that you never step a foot wrong. It's that you recognize when you have, and you do everything you can to atone for your mistakes and redeem them. And in my opinion, Wallace definitely did. And there are many instances here. I've bookmarked them all from the book here. William Wallace Robin Hood revealed 5 or 6 different experiences, events, visions that he had or received. You know, the things that he went through, the things that were, you know, given to him as sort of like a vision. Oh, I'm trying to think of the correct term. It's kind of on the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of it. It's like an inspiration, maybe would be more like it. Like things that he's shown. You know, it's kind of like in the New Testament when the devil tempts Jesus, takes him up to the highest point in the world and shows him the whole world, and he says, "Bow down and worship me, and you will have all that." There's a very similar experience that Wallace has, where you know he sees the whole of Scotland on fire, you know, and he sees, you know, has this vision of the whole land and like what's going on throughout the entire country, and like he's told how to redeem the situation, how to redress what's going on, and what role he will have to play in it. And you know, he's shown his place in history. He's shown, you know, that he will not live to a long age. You know, he will not live to old age, but you know, his life will be very short. But the impact that he will make will be tremendous. Like he will lead the Scots, you know, to great things, to victory, and you know, the oppression of the English is wrong, and you know, you know, the higher forces in heaven are not going to stand by and allow it to happen. You know, they have, you know, given Wallace everything he needs, you know, to go out and put things right. You know, so I think there's a very strong case for Wallace being considered a Christian saint, certainly a Catholic saint at the very least. Anyway, I'm going to get into that in future videos, and thank you for watching.